In the hushed halls of Willowford Hall, a scream shatters the night. Sir Reginald Ashbourne lies dead, poisoned in a locked library, a priceless manuscript vanished, a singed page clutched in his hand. Who slipped cyanide into his sherry? Why do quill-shaped clues point to betrayal? Enter Miss Jane Marple, her sharp mind unravelling a web of secrets, lies, and hidden motives. A pause. The clock ticks louder. Was it greed, love, or vengeance that drove a killer to strike? In this chilling tale of deception, every guest hides a secret, and every clue leads to a shocking truth. Will you unravel the mystery before Miss Marple's little grey cells do? Chapter 1. The Quiet Haven of Willowford Hall. In the drowsy haze of a late August afternoon, Willowford Hall stood as a monument to an older England, its ivy-clad walls and mullioned windows basking in the golden light of a fading summer. Nestled in the heart of the Devon countryside, the estate was a haven of quiet civility, its sprawling gardens and ancient library a testament to the refined tastes of its owner, Sir Reginald Ashbourne. The baronet, a man of 60 with a penchant for rare books and a reputation for exacting standards, had opened his home for a week-long literary retreat. A gathering of scholars, writers, and enthusiasts united by their passion for the written word. The great hall buzzed with polite conversation as guests mingled over tea, their voices a soft murmur against the crackle of the fireplace. Sir Reginald, resplendent in a tailored tweed suit, presided over the gathering with the air of a benevolent monarch. His wife, Lady Eleanor, a delicate woman of 40, with eyes that seemed perpetually lost in thought, moved gracefully among the guests, her smile warm but fleeting. Their daughter Beatrice, a vivacious young woman of 22, flitted about with a tray of scones, her laughter cutting through the room's decorum like a bell. Among the guests were an eclectic assortment of characters, each drawn to Willowford Hall by the promise of intellectual discourse and the allure of Sir Reginald's legendary library. There was Dr. Percival Gray, a stooped historian with a penchant for medieval manuscripts and a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles. Beside him sat Mrs. Clara Winthrop, a novelist of middling success, whose sharp tongue and sharper wit had earned her both admirers and enemies. Mr. Lionel Baxter, a brash young publisher from London, lounged in a corner, his eyes darting between Beatrice and the rare first editions lining the walls. Miss Lavinia Poole, a retired governess with a passion for detective fiction, sat quietly, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she observed the room with keen bird-like eyes. Finally, there was Mr. Victor Hammond, a reclusive bibliophile whose pale face and whispered comments about obscure texts gave him an air of mystery. The afternoon passed in a haze of pleasantries, but beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Sir Reginald, it was whispered, had recently acquired a rare manuscript, a 14th-century illuminated text said to be worth a fortune. Rumours of its value had spread, and more than one guest cast covetous glances toward the library's locked doors. Beatrice, too, seemed preoccupied, her usual exuberance tempered by a fleeting shadow in her eyes. Lady Eleanor, ever the gracious hostess, excused herself early, citing a headache, while Mrs. Winthrop's barbed remarks about literary pretension drew a flush to Dr. Gray's cheeks. As the clock struck 5, Sir Reginald rose to address the gathering. "My friends," he began, his voice rich with authority, "tonight we shall dine in the library, surrounded by the treasures of the mind." Tomorrow I shall unveil a surprise, a manuscript that will astonish you all." His eyes gleamed with pride, but there was something else in his tone, a hint of challenge, as if he knew the announcement would unsettle someone in the room. The guests murmured their approval, but Miss Lavinia Poole's knitting needles paused, her lips pursing slightly. She alone seemed to sense the undercurrent of unease, the faint ripple of discord that would soon shatter the tranquillity of Willowford Hall. That evening, as the guests retired to their rooms to dress for dinner, a scream pierced the stillness of the house. It came from the library, a high, keening wail that sent servants and guests alike rushing toward the source. There, sprawled across the Persian rug, lay Sir Reginald Ashbourne, his face contorted in a mask of agony, a glass of sherry shattered beside him. His hand clutched a single page torn from a book, its edges singed as if by fire. The library doors, always kept locked, stood ajar, and the priceless manuscript was nowhere to be seen. The local constable, a well-meaning but flustered man named Inspector Japp, arrived within the hour. His initial assessment was blunt: poison, likely administered through the sherry. The library was sealed, the guests confined to the house, and a pall of suspicion settled over Willowford Hall. It was then that a telegram was sent, at Lady Eleanor's insistence, to a certain Miss Jane Marple, whose reputation for unravelling the most perplexing of mysteries had reached even the remote corners of Devon. As the moon rose over the estate, casting long shadows across the gardens, the stage was set for a drama of deception, desire and deduction, one that would test the limits of Miss Marple's little grey cells. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Death. The morning after Sir Reginald Ashbourne's death, Willowford Hall seemed to hold its breath. The golden light of the previous day had given way to a grey drizzle that clung to the windows, casting the great house in a mournful pallor. The guests, confined to the drawing-room under Inspector Japp's orders, sat in uneasy silence, their faces a gallery of shock, suspicion, and guarded secrets. The air was thick with the scent of damp wool and strong tea, served by a trembling housemaid who darted nervous glances at the closed library doors. Inspector Japp, a stout man with a walrus moustache and a penchant for stating the obvious, paced the room, his notebook clutched like a talisman. "Poison, no doubt about it," he declared for the third time that morning. As if repetition might conjure clarity, the sherry glass was laced with something, cyanide. The doctor thinks, though we'll need the lab to confirm. Nasty stuff. Quick, too. He paused, eyeing the assembled company. Someone in this house knew exactly what they were doing. Lady Eleanor, pale and composed in a black silk dress, sat by the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "It's unthinkable," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Reginald was not a man to make enemies." Her words hung in the air, met with a sceptical glance from Mrs. Clara Winthrop, who sat fanning herself with a copy of the Strand magazine. "Not enemies, perhaps," Mrs. Winthrop said, her tone sharp as a paper cut, "but rivals?" "Oh yes, that manuscript of his was worth more than some people's lives." Her eyes flicked toward Mr. Victor Hammond, who stood by the fireplace, his thin frame hunched as he stared into the flames. Hammond stiffened but said nothing, his fingers twisting a silver ring on his left hand. Dr. Percival Gray, adjusting his spectacles for the umpteenth time, cleared his throat. "I hardly think it proper to speculate," he said, his voice quavering. Sir Reginald was a scholar, a gentleman. This tragedy must be a mistake. A mistake? Mr. Lionel Baxter, the publisher, let out a harsh laugh. A man doesn't drink poisoned sherry by accident, Gray. Someone wanted him dead, and that manuscript gone. His gaze lingered on Beatrice, who sat curled in an armchair, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. She had not spoken since the discovery of her father's body, and her silence seemed to weigh on the room like a physical presence. Miss Lavinia Poole, her knitting needles clicking softly, looked up from her work. "It's curious, isn't it?" she said, her voice mild but her eyes sharp. "The library was locked, always locked, Sir Reginald said. Yet the doors were open, and the manuscript vanished. How does one enter a locked room, poison a man, and leave without a trace?" Inspector Japp frowned, clearly irritated by the interruption. "We're looking into that, Miss Poole. The lock was forced, plain as day. Someone broke in, simple as that." "Simple?" Miss Poole's lips twitched, as if amused by some private thought. "Nothing about this is simple, Inspector." The conversation was cut short by the sound of a car crunching up the gravel drive. All eyes turned to the window as a small black Daimler came to a stop. From it emerged a figure whose appearance was as precise as it was unassuming. Miss Jane Marple, her grey hair neatly pinned beneath a modest hat, her black coat buttoned against the drizzle. She carried a small valise and an air of serene authority, her sharp eyes taking in the house with a single sweeping glance. Inspector Japp greeted her at the door, his bluster tempered by a grudging respect. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat. "Didn't expect you so soon. Nasty business, this. Poison, locked rooms, missing manuscripts. Hope you're up for it." Miss Marple's smile was polite but cool, like a winter sun. "I'm always up for the truth, Inspector," she said, her voice soft yet carrying a weight that silenced the room. "Now perhaps you will show me to the scene of this unfortunate event." The library, when they entered, was a study in contrasts. The grandeur of its towering bookshelves and polished oak table marred by the chalk outline where Sir Reginald had fallen. The shattered sherry glass had been removed for analysis, but the torn page he had clutched remained, now sealed in an evidence bag. Miss Marple knelt beside the outline, her gloved fingers tracing the air above the rug as if reading an invisible script. "Curious," she murmured, her eyes narrowing. "The page is singed, yet there is no sign of fire in the room. And the lock, Inspector, you say it was forced?" Japp nodded, pointing to the heavy oak doors. "Pried open, clear as day. Crowbar, maybe. We found scratches on the frame." Miss Marple rose, her gaze lingering on the lock. "Scratches, yes, but from the inside or the outside?" She did not wait for an answer, instead turning to the shelves, her fingers brushing lightly over the spines of books. "Sir Reginald was proud of his collection, I understand. This manuscript, it was valuable, worth a king's ransom," Japp said. "Old, rare, one of a kind. He was set to show it off tomorrow." "And now it is gone," Miss Marple said softly, almost to herself. "Gone. Or hidden." She turned to Japp, her expression unreadable. "I should like to speak with the household, Inspector. One at a time, if you please. There is much to learn, and the truth, I find, often hides in the smallest details." As Japp bustled off to arrange the interviews, Miss Marple stood alone in the library, her eyes scanning the room with the precision of a jeweller examining a flawed gem. The rain pattered against the windows, and somewhere in the house a clock chimed the hour. The game, she knew, had begun. Chapter 3. The arrival of Miss Marple. The drawing-room of Willowford Hall, with its heavy velvet curtains and polished mahogany furniture, seemed to shrink under the weight of Miss Jane Marple's presence. Though her frame was slight and her manner unassuming, there was a quiet intensity in her gaze that commanded attention. The guests, still reeling from the events of the previous night, watched her with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension as she settled into a high-backed chair, her hands folded neatly over her valise. Inspector Japp stood by the fireplace, his notebook open, his expression one of barely concealed impatience. "I thank you all for your patience," Miss Marple began, her voice soft but clear, carrying the crisp cadence of a schoolmistress addressing her pupils. "A tragedy has occurred, and it is my task, our task, to uncover the truth. I shall speak with each of you in turn, and I ask only that you be precise and truthful. The smallest detail you see may hold the key to this puzzle." Mrs. Clara Winthrop let out a theatrical sigh, fanning herself with her magazine. "Really, Miss Marple, must we endure this interrogation? The police have already poked and prodded us to no end. Surely you don't suspect us of this dreadful business?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her smile remained polite. "I suspect no one, Mrs. Winthrop, and yet I suspect everyone. That is the nature of a mystery, is it not? The truth hides behind the most innocent faces." Her gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on each guest. Lady Eleanor, pale and composed, Beatrice, her eyes downcast, Dr. Gray, fidgeting with his spectacles, Mr. Baxter, lounging with forced nonchalance, Mr. Hammond, silent and watchful, and Miss Poole, whose knitting needles paused as if sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere. Inspector Japp cleared his throat. "Right then. Miss Marple, who'd you like to start with?" "Lady Eleanor, if you please," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but firm. "As the mistress of the house, she may provide context." Lady Eleanor rose, her movements graceful but strained, and followed Miss Marple to a small anteroom off the drawing-room. The door closed softly behind them, leaving the others to exchange uneasy glances. Inside the anteroom, Miss Marple sat opposite Lady Eleanor, her eyes kind but piercing. "Lady Eleanor, I am deeply sorry for your loss. Sir Reginald was, I understand, a man of great intellect and passion. Tell me, if you will, about yesterday afternoon. What was his mood? Did anything seem amiss?" Lady Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap, her fingers betraying a tremor. "Reginald was himself, proud, perhaps a little preoccupied with his manuscript. He spoke of it often, you know, its rarity, its value. He was eager to share it with the guests." She hesitated, her voice dropping, but there was tension. He and Beatrice had words earlier that day. Nothing serious, I thought. Just a father's concern for his daughter's future. Miss Marple nodded, her expression encouraging. "And this manuscript, did he mention anyone taking a particular interest in it?" "Everyone did," Lady Eleanor said quickly, then caught herself. "That is, everyone admired it. Dr. Gray, of course, as a historian. Mr. Hammond, too. He's a collector, you know, and rather intense about it. Even Mrs. Winthrop made some remark about its worth, though I think she was being spiteful. Miss Marple made a mental note, her face betraying nothing. And the library doors, were they locked, as was his custom? Always, Lady Eleanor said firmly. Reginald was meticulous about that. Only he and I had keys, and mine was in my room all evening." "Thank you, Lady Eleanor," Miss Marple said, rising. "You have been most helpful. Please send in Miss Beatrice next." Beatrice entered, her youthful energy subdued, her face pale beneath a cascade of auburn curls. She sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap. "I don't know what I can tell you," she said before Miss Marple could speak. "Father he was fine at tea, happy even. Then he went to the library and then—" Her voice broke and she looked away. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft as a whisper. "My dear, I know this is difficult, but tell me, what were these words you had with your father? Your mother mentioned a disagreement." Beatrice's eyes widened, then narrowed. "It was nothing. He didn't like Lionel, Mr. Baxter, I mean. Thought he was too forward. Father wanted me to focus on my studies, not romance." She flushed, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. "But I wouldn't." "Of course not," Miss Marple said soothingly. "But tell me, did you see anyone near the library before dinner? Anyone at all?" Beatrice hesitated, her eyes flickering. I saw Mr. Hammond. He was in the hall, near the library doors. He said he was looking for a book, but it was odd. He seemed nervous." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly, as if a piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. "Thank you, Beatrice. That will be all for now." One by one, the others followed. Dr. Gray stammering about his admiration for Sir Reginald's collection. Mrs. Winthrop, dismissive and sharp-tongued. Mr. Baxter, evasive about his whereabouts, and Mr. Hammond, whose cryptic answers about rare books left Miss Marple's eyes gleaming with interest. Miss Poole, the last to be interviewed, spoke little, but watched Miss Marple closely, her knitting needles never faltering. As the interviews concluded, Miss Marple returned to the library alone, her steps deliberate. She stood before the oak doors, examining the scratches Japp had noted. "Forced, he says," she murmured, her fingers tracing the marks. "But the splinters, they point inward, not outward. Curious, indeed." Outside, the rain had stopped, and a pale sun broke through the clouds. Miss Marple's mind, however, was far from the weather. The little grey cells, as she called them, were already at work, sifting through the words, the glances, the lies. Someone in Willowford Hall had poisoned Sir Reginald Ashbourne, and someone had taken the manuscript. But were they the same person? And why, she wondered, had the torn page been singed, yet the library bore no trace of fire? The answer, she knew, lay in the details, and in the hearts of those who hid them. Chapter 4. The questions deepen. The library of Willowford Hall, with its towering shelves and lingering scent of old leather, seemed to hold secrets in every shadow. By midday, Miss Jane Marple had returned to its sombre embrace, her sharp eyes scanning the room with the precision of a watchmaker. Inspector Japp hovered nearby, his impatience barely concealed as he watched her examine the scene once more. The chalk outline of Sir Reginald's body remained, a stark reminder of the crime, and the torn, singed page, still in its evidence bag, lay on the oak table, a silent witness to the mystery. Miss Marple knelt beside the outline, her gloved hands hovering over the spot where the sherry glass had shattered. "The glass, Inspector," she said, her voice calm but probing. "You are certain it contained cyanide?" Japp nodded, flipping open his notebook. "The doctor's preliminary report confirms it. Bitter almond smell, quick death, classic signs. The lab's testing the residue now, but I'd wager my pension it's cyanide." The glass was on the floor, smashed, like he dropped it when the poison hit. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. And the bottle of sherry, where was it found? Japp pointed to a sideboard near the fireplace, where a crystal decanter sat, its amber contents glinting in the dim light. Right there, half empty. We've sent a sample for testing, but it looks clean so far. Whoever did this was clever. Poisoned just his glass, not the whole bottle. Clever indeed, Miss Marple murmured, rising to inspect the decanter. She tilted her head, noting the faint dust on its surface, undisturbed except for a single smudge near the stopper. And this smudge, Inspector, did you notice it? Japp squinted, then shrugged. Probably a servant's carelessness. They're always polishing things around here. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her tone non-committal. She turned her attention to the torn page, lifting the evidence bag to study it under the light. The paper was thick, vellum-like, with elegant script partially obscured by scorch marks. This page, it is from the manuscript, yes? We think so, Japp said. Matches the description Sir Reginald gave. 14th century, illuminated, rare as hen's teeth. Why it's singed, though, beats me. No fire in the room, no matches, nothing. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. No fire, yet a burn. A contradiction, Inspector, and contradictions are the breadcrumbs of truth. She set the page down and turned to the library doors, her fingers tracing the scratches Japp had pointed out the day before. These marks, you said they suggest a crowbar. Clear as day, Japp replied. Pried open from the outside, I'd say. Someone forced their way in. Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. Or wished us to think so. She stepped back, her gaze sweeping the room. I should like to speak with the servants now, Inspector. They see more than we credit them for. Japp sighed but nodded, summoning the butler, Mr. Grayson, a stooped man with a face like weathered parchment. Grayson stood stiffly, his hands clasped behind his back, as Miss Marple began her questions. Mr. Grayson, she said, her voice gentle, you were in the house all evening, I presume. Did you see anyone near the library before the scream was heard? Grayson's eyes flickered, but his voice was steady. I was in the pantry, ma'am, preparing the dinner service. I saw no one near the library, though I did hear Mr. Hammond in the hall earlier. He asked about a book, a specific volume, he said, but I told him the library was locked. Miss Marple nodded, her expression encouraging. And the sherry decanter, did you fill it that day? Yes, ma'am, Grayson said. I filled it from the cellar stock at 3 o'clock, as Sir Reginald requested. It was untouched when I placed it in the library at 5. And the glass, Miss Marple pressed. Was it already on the sideboard? Grayson hesitated, his brow furrowing. No, ma'am. Sir Reginald always kept a single glass in the library for his evening sherry. I didn't see it when I brought the decanter, but I assumed he'd taken it out himself. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing, dismissing Grayson with a nod. Next came the housemaid, Jenny, a nervous girl of 19 who clutched her apron as she spoke. I didn't see nothing, ma'am, she said, her voice trembling. I was upstairs, turning down the beds. But I did hear Miss Beatrice and her father earlier. They were in the study, arguing. She was crying, I think. Arguing? Miss Marple's tone was soft, almost maternal. About what, my dear? Jenny flushed, glancing at Japp. I didn't hear much, ma'am. Something about Mr. Baxter. Sir Reginald said he wasn't suitable, and Miss Beatrice got upset. Miss Marple thanked the girl and sent her away, her mind already turning over the new information. She returned to the drawing room, where the guests were growing restless, their polite facades fraying under the strain of confinement. Mrs. Winthrop was snapping at Dr. Gray, who mumbled apologies, while Mr. Baxter paced like a caged animal. Beatrice sat apart, her face pale, and Mr. Hammond remained by the fireplace, his silence as impenetrable as ever. Miss Marple addressed them all, her voice cutting through the tension. "I have learned much, but there is more to uncover. Each of you was in this house when Sir Reginald died. Each of you had opportunity, perhaps motive. I ask you to consider, what did you see, what did you hear that seemed out of place?" The room fell silent, but Miss Marple's eyes missed nothing. The way Beatrice's hands tightened on her handkerchief, the flicker of unease in Dr. Gray's face, the subtle glance Mrs. Winthrop cast at Mr. Hammond. The little grey cells, she thought, were beginning to align the pieces, but the picture was far from complete. As the clock struck noon, Miss Marple excused herself, her mind buzzing with questions. The singed page, the smudged decanter, the inward-pointing scratches. Each was a thread in a tapestry of deceit. But whose hand had woven it, and why? The answer, she knew, lay not just in the clues, but in the hearts of those who hid them. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings Emerge. The afternoon at Willowford Hall draped itself in a heavy stillness, the grey drizzle outside mirroring the gloom within. The guests, confined to the drawing-room under Inspector Japp's watchful eye, shifted restlessly, their nerves frayed by the weight of suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, however, moved with serene purpose, her small figure a quiet anchor amidst the storm of unease. She had spent the morning piecing together the fragments of testimony, her little grey cells sifting through the tangle of alibis and half-truths. Now, as the clock chimed 2, she sensed the mystery was beginning to reveal its shape, though not without its deceptions. Inspector Japp, his moustache bristling with frustration, had latched onto what he believed was a breakthrough. "It's clear as day, Miss Marple," he declared, brandishing a small vial he had found in the garden near the library window. "This was tucked under a rosebush. Smells like cyanide, I'd wager. And who was seen skulking about last night? None other than that Hammond fellow. Shifty type, always muttering about books. I'll bet my badge he's our man." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes narrowing as she examined the vial without touching it. "A compelling find, Inspector," she said, her tone measured. "But tell me, why would a murderer, clever enough to poison a single glass, leave such an incriminating item so carelessly discarded?" Japp blinked, his certainty faltering. Well, perhaps he panicked, dropped it in his haste to flee. "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her smile faint but enigmatic. "Or perhaps it was meant to be found." She turned her attention to the guests who had overheard Japp's pronouncement, and now cast uneasy glances at Mr. Victor Hammond. The bibliophile stood by the window, his pale face impassive, though his fingers twisted the silver ring on his hand with renewed vigour. "Mr. Hammond," Miss Marple called softly, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Might I have a word?" Hammond approached, his steps reluctant, his eyes wary. "I've told you all I know, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low and clipped. "I was in my room before dinner, reading. I had no reason to harm Sir Reginald. Miss Marple's gaze was gentle but unyielding. And yet you were seen near the library, Mr. Hammond, by Miss Beatrice. You asked about a book, I believe?" Hammond's jaw tightened. I was curious about the manuscript. Sir Reginald had spoken of it so highly. I only wished to see it, nothing more." "And did you?" Miss Marple pressed, her tone deceptively mild. "No," Hammond said quickly. "The doors were locked. I returned to my room." Miss Marple nodded, dismissing him with a polite smile, but her mind was already turning over his words. The vial, the sighting near the library, the obsession with rare books. It all pointed too neatly to Hammond, like a signpost in a fog. Too neat, she thought, for a crime so carefully orchestrated. Her attention shifted to the others, each of whom seemed to wear their guilt or innocence like a ill-fitting mask. Mrs. Clara Winthrop, ever the provocateur, was quick to seize on Japp's discovery. "Well, there you have it," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Mr. Hammond, the quiet collector, with his creepy fascination for old books. It's always the quiet ones, isn't it?" Dr. Percival Gray, adjusting his spectacles nervously, protested. "Now, see here, Mrs. Winthrop, that's hardly fair. We're all under strain. Accusations won't help." "Won't they?" Mr. Lionel Baxter interjected, his tone sharp. "Someone poisoned Sir Reginald, and that vial didn't plant itself. Hammond's got motive. Everyone knew he coveted that manuscript." Beatrice, who had been silent, suddenly stood, her face flushed. "Stop it, all of you! Father's dead, and you're squabbling like vultures. Mr. Hammond he couldn't." Her voice broke, and she sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. Lady Eleanor moved to comfort her daughter, but her own expression was strained, her eyes darting toward the library doors. Miss Lavinia Poole, knitting quietly in the corner, looked up, her bird-like eyes meeting Miss Marple's for a fleeting moment. There was a spark of understanding there, as if the retired governess sensed the same undercurrent of deception that Miss Marple had begun to unravel. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple requested a private word with Inspector Japp in the library. "Inspector," she said, standing before the sideboard where the sherry decanter still sat, "have you considered the timing of the poison? Sir Reginald was found at 7:30, yet the sherry was poured at 5. Cyanide acts quickly, within minutes, not hours. How then was the poison administered?" Japp frowned, scratching his head. "Well, that's a puzzler. Maybe the killer slipped it into the glass just before he drank." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. And yet the glass was on the sideboard, untouched, when Grayson brought the decanter. No one entered the library after 5, or so we are told. A locked room, a poisoned glass, a missing manuscript. It is a riddle, Inspector, but not an unsolvable one. She moved to the bookshelf, her fingers brushing over the spines where the manuscript had been kept. "This shelf," she murmured, "it is slightly askew. Dust has been disturbed, but not recently. And this—" She paused, picking up a small brass paperweight shaped like a quill. "This was on the table, was it not, when Sir Reginald was found?" Japp nodded, puzzled. "Yes, but what of it? Just a trinket." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, turning the paperweight in her hands. "Or perhaps it is a clue to something more." She set it down, her mind racing. The vial, the scratches, the singed page, the paperweight, each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. Someone, she knew, was steering the investigation toward Mr. Hammond, but the truth lay elsewhere, hidden in the contradictions and the silences. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple resolved to observe the guests more closely. The red herrings were multiplying, but her little grey cells were patient. The truth, she thought, was like a rare book, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right reader to uncover it. Chapter 6. A clue in detail. The evening shadows lengthened across Willowford Hall, casting intricate patterns on the polished floors, as the drizzle outside gave way to a misty twilight. The atmosphere in the drawing-room had grown taut, like a violin string stretched to its breaking point. The guests, still confined under Inspector Japp's orders, exchanged wary glances, their earlier civility eroded by the mounting pressure of suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, however, remained an island of calm, her sharp eyes missing nothing as she sipped her tea, and observed the subtle interplay of guilt and fear. She had spent the afternoon revisiting the library, her mind turning over the clues that seemed to multiply with each passing hour. The singed page, the smudged decanter, the inward-pointing scratches on the library doors, and now the brass paperweight, which she had noted with particular interest. Each detail, she knew, was a thread in the tapestry of the crime, but one thread stood out, glinting like a needle in the weave. It was during dinner, a strained affair served in the dining-room with the library still sealed, that Miss Marple's attention fixed on a seemingly trivial gesture. Mr. Lionel Baxter, the brash publisher, had been recounting a story about a literary auction in London, his voice loud and his gestures expansive. As he reached for his wine-glass, his cufflink, a silver affair shaped like a quill, identical to the paperweight in the library, caught the candlelight, drawing a faint gasp from Beatrice, who quickly looked away. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her teacup pausing midway to her lips. "Mr. Baxter," she said, her voice soft but carrying across the table, "that is a most striking cufflink. May I ask where you acquired it?" Baxter froze, his hand hovering over his glass. "Oh, this?" he said, recovering with a forced laugh. "A gift from a client, nothing special. Why do you ask?" "No reason," Miss Marple replied, her smile serene. "I merely noticed its resemblance to a certain paperweight in the library. A curious coincidence, don't you think?" The table fell silent, the clink of cutlery ceasing as all eyes turned to Baxter. He flushed, his grin faltering. "Coincidence? I suppose so. Plenty of quill-shaped trinkets about, aren't there?" "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her tone light, but her gaze unwavering. She turned to Beatrice, whose face had paled. "Miss Ashbourne, you seem familiar with such designs. Did your father perhaps commission similar items?" Beatrice's fingers tightened around her fork, her voice barely above a whisper. "Father, he did have a fondness for quill motifs. He had a paperweight made for the library, and he gave me a brooch once, in the same design." Her eyes flicked to Baxter, then away, as if afraid of betraying a secret. Miss Marple nodded, filing the information away. The quill motif, she thought, was no mere coincidence. It was a clue, small but significant, linking the library to someone in the house, someone who had been close enough to Sir Reginald to know his habits, his treasures, his weaknesses. After dinner, Miss Marple requested a private word with Inspector Japp in the ante-room. "Inspector," she said, her voice low, "I wonder if you have examined the alibis for the hour before Sir Reginald's death, say between 6 and 7 o'clock. Japp flipped open his notebook, his brow furrowing. We've got statements from everyone. Lady Eleanor was in her room, resting. Beatrice was in the garden, says she was alone. Dr. Gray was in his room, reading. Mrs. Winthrop was writing in the parlour. Baxter claims he was in the billiard room, practising shots. Hammond says he was in his room too, that we know he was seen near the library earlier. And Miss Poole was knitting in the drawing-room, with the servants coming and going. And the servants, Miss Marple pressed. Grayson was in the pantry. Jenny was upstairs. The cook and footman were in the kitchen, preparing dinner. All accounted for, more or less. Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. More or less, Inspector, is precisely the problem. Alibis are like books. Some have pages missing, others have been rewritten. I wonder, for instance, about Mr. Baxter's billiard game. Did anyone see him there? Japp hesitated, then shook his head. No, he was alone by his account. But the billiard room's just down the hall from the library. Easy enough to slip out and back. Quite so, Miss Marple said, her eyes gleaming. And the quill cuff-link, did you notice it? Japp blinked. Can't say I did. What's it got to do with anything? Perhaps nothing, Miss Marple said, though her tone suggested otherwise. But I find it curious that a man so casual as Mr. Baxter should wear a cuff-link so specific to Sir Reginald's tastes. And Beatrice's reaction. Did you see how she flinched? Japp scratched his head, his confidence waning. You're saying Baxter's our man? I am saying nothing of the sort, Miss Marple, replied, her voice firm. I'm saying that the truth lies in the details, and the details are beginning to speak. We must listen carefully. Later that evening, as the guests retired to their rooms, Miss Marple lingered in the drawing-room, her eyes falling on Miss Lavinia Poole, who was still knitting, her needles a soft counterpoint to the ticking clock. Miss Poole, Miss Marple said, approaching her, you have a keen eye for observation, I think. Did you notice anything unusual last night, before the tragedy? Miss Poole's needles paused, her gaze meeting Miss Marple's with a quiet intensity. I noticed many things, Miss Marple, she said, her voice low. For instance, I noticed that Mr. Baxter's shoes were muddy at dinner last night, though he claimed to have been indoors all evening. And I noticed that Lady Eleanor's headache seemed to vanish rather quickly when the scream was heard. Miss Marple's smile was one of quiet approval. You are a woman after my own heart, Miss Poole. Keep your eyes open, if you please. The truth is near, but it is not yet in our grasp. As she left the drawing-room, Miss Marple's mind was alight with possibilities. The quill cuff-link, the muddy shoes, the vanishing headache, each was a clue, a contradiction that pointed to a deeper truth. The red herrings were falling away, but the real killer, she knew, was still hiding in plain sight, waiting for her to turn the final page. Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The morning sun broke through the mist, casting a pale glow over Willowford Hall, but the light did little to lift the oppressive atmosphere within. The guests, now in their third day of confinement, were fraying at the edges, their polite facades crumbling under the strain of suspicion and scrutiny. Miss Jane Marple, however, remained a study in composure, her neat figure moving through the house with the quiet assurance of one who sensed the truth drawing nearer. Her little grey cells were at work, weaving together the threads of evidence. the quill cufflink, the muddy shoes, the singed page, into a pattern that was beginning to take shape. The drawing room, where the guests had gathered for morning coffee, buzzed with tension. Mrs. Clara Winthrop's sharp tongue had grown sharper, her remarks cutting at Dr. Percival Gray, who fidgeted nervously with his spectacles. Mr. Lionel Baxter, his usual bravado subdued, paced by the window, casting furtive glances at Beatrice, who sat silently, her eyes fixed on a book she wasn't reading. Lady Eleanor, pale but composed, sipped her coffee with mechanical precision, while Mr. Victor Hammond stood apart, his pale face unreadable. Only Miss Lavinia Poole seemed unruffled, her knitting needles clicking steadily as she observed the room with her keen, bird-like eyes. Miss Marple entered quietly, her presence commanding attention despite her unassuming demeanour. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but carrying a weight that silenced the room. "I trust you all slept well, though I imagine sleep is difficult under such circumstances." Inspector Japp, who had been reviewing his notes by the fireplace, looked up with a grunt. "Miss Marple, I hope you've got something new. This lot's starting to drive me up the wall with their bickering." Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. "Patience, Inspector. The truth is like a rare manuscript. It requires careful handling to reveal its value." She turned to the group, her eyes sweeping over each face. "I have been considering the matter of the manuscript, the missing treasure of Willowford Hall. It occurs to me that its absence may tell us as much as its presence would have." Mrs. Winthrop snorted, fanning herself with her magazine. "You're suggesting someone stole it for profit. Hardly original, Miss Marple. Hammond's the obvious choice. He's practically drooling over rare books." Hammond's head snapped up, his voice low but sharp. "I resent that, Mrs. Winthrop. My interest in Sir Reginald's collection was purely academic." "I had no need to steal." "Academic?" Baxter interjected, his tone mocking. "You were sniffing around the library like a hound. Don't pretend you didn't want that manuscript for yourself." The room erupted in murmurs, accusations flying like sparks. Beatrice's voice cut through, trembling but firm. "Stop it, all of you! Father's dead, and you're arguing over a book. Don't you care who did this?" Miss Marple's gaze softened as she looked at Beatrice. "We care, my dear, and we shall find the truth. But first, I must ask, did your father ever mention enemies? Someone who might have resented his success, his collection, his influence?" Beatrice hesitated, her eyes darting to her mother. He had disagreements. With Mr. Baxter, sometimes, over business. Father thought he was too ambitious, too ruthless. And with Dr. Gray once, about a manuscript they both wanted at an auction. But nothing serious, nothing worth... Her voice broke, and she looked away. Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting the new threads, Baxter's ambition, Gray's rivalry. She turned to Dr. Gray, whose hands were shaking as he adjusted his spectacles. "Dr. Gray, you and Sir Reginald competed for a manuscript, I understand. Was there bitterness between you?" Gray's face flushed. "Bitterness? No, nothing of the sort. It was a scholarly disagreement, nothing more. I admired Sir Reginald. His death is a tragedy." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on him, her expression unreadable. "Admiration can coexist with envy, Dr. Gray. The human heart is a complex thing." The conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion at the door. Jenny, the housemaid, burst in, her face pale, and her apron twisted in her hands. "Miss Marple, Inspector, You'd better come quick. I found something in Mr. Baxter's room while I was cleaning." Japper was on his feet in an instant, his moustache twitching. "What is it, girl?" Jenny held out a small folded piece of paper, its edges yellowed and slightly singed. "It was under his mattress, sir. It looks like a page from a book, like the one Sir Reginald was holding." The room froze, all eyes turning to Baxter, whose face drained of colour. "That's absurd!" he snapped, leaping to his feet. "I've never seen that before. Someone's planted it, I tell you." Miss Marple took the paper from Jenny, her gloved fingers handling it with care. It was indeed vellum, with faint traces of illuminated script, and the edges bore the same scorch marks as the page found with Sir Reginald's body. "Curious," she murmured, her eyes flicking to Baxter. "How did this come to be in your room, Mr. Baxter?" "I told you, it's a frame-up." Baxter's voice was hoarse, his eyes wild. "Someone's trying to pin this on me. Hammond, probably, or even Beatrice, for all I know." Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Lady Eleanor rose, her voice sharp. "How dare you accuse my daughter?" Miss Marple raised a hand, silencing the room. "Enough. This page is a clue, but not a conclusion. We must ask ourselves, why hide it in Mr. Baxter's room? To incriminate him, or to divert attention from someone else?" Jap, clutching the paper, looked triumphant. "This is it, Miss Marple. Baxter's our man. Motive, opportunity, and now evidence. I'm taking him in for questioning." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her eyes gleamed with quiet dissent. "Do as you must, Inspector, but I caution you, the truth is not so easily bound. This page, like the vial in the garden, may be another red herring." As Jap led Baxter away, protesting loudly, Miss Marple's gaze settled on the remaining guests. Lies were surfacing, she thought, like bubbles in a pond, each one revealing a glimpse of the depths below. The manuscript, the poison, the quill motif, they were all connected. But the key lay in the human heart, in the secrets that drove someone to murder. Chapter 8. The emotional turning point. The air in Willowford Hall had grown thick with suspicion, each glance between the guests charged with unspoken accusations. By the third evening, the strain of confinement and the shadow of Sir Reginald's murder had worn down even the most resolute among them. The drawing-room, once a haven of polite discourse, now felt like a stage where every gesture was scrutinized, every word weighed for hidden meaning. Miss Jane Marple, seated by the fire with her knitting in her lap, observed the scene with her usual calm, her sharp eyes catching the flickers of emotion that betrayed the cracks in the guests' facades. Inspector Japp had returned from questioning Mr. Lionel Baxter, his face flushed with the confidence of a man who believed he was closing in on the truth. "Baxter's story doesn't hold up," announced to the room, his moustache twitching with satisfaction. "Claims he was in the billiard room all evening, but no one saw him there. And that singed page under his mattress? It's from the manuscript, no question. He's got motive. Wanted Sir Reginald out of the way to get to Beatrice and her inheritance." Beatrice, who had been staring blankly at the fire, flinched at the mention of her name. "That's not true," she cried, her voice breaking. "Lionel wouldn't, he couldn't—" Her words trailed off, and she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Lady Eleanor moved to her daughter's side, her face a mask of controlled grief. "Inspector, you go too far," she said, her voice icy. "Accusing a man on such flimsy evidence is unjust. My husband's death is tragedy enough without tearing my family apart." Japp, undeterred, waved a hand. "Evidence is evidence, Lady Eleanor. And there's more. Baxter's business is in trouble. He's been borrowing heavily, and Sir Reginald refused to invest in his latest venture. That's motive enough for murder." Miss Marple's knitting needles paused, her eyes narrowing as she listened. The room was a powder keg, and Baxter's arrest had lit a spark. She sensed the moment was ripe for a revelation. Not the full truth, perhaps, but a partial one. A crack in the wall of lies that would lead her closer to the heart of the mystery. "Inspector," she said, her voice soft but commanding attention, "you are right to follow the evidence, but I wonder if we might consider another perspective. The page found in Mr. Baxter's room is indeed significant, but its placement seems convenient. Too convenient, perhaps, for a man clever enough to poison a single glass of sherry." Japp frowned, his certainty wavering. "You're saying it's another plant? Like the vial in the garden?" Miss Marple's smile was faint. "I am saying that the truth is often obscured by what appears obvious. Let us consider the emotions at play. Murder, after all, is not merely a matter of means and opportunity. It is a matter of the heart." Her gaze settled on Beatrice, whose sobs had quieted, but whose hands still trembled. "Miss Ashbourne," Miss Marple said gently, "you have been through a great deal, but I sense you know more than you have shared. Your father's death has wounded you deeply, but so too has something else, something you fear to speak of. Will you trust me with it?" Beatrice's eyes widened, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. The room held its breath, every guest leaning forward, their faces a mixture of curiosity and dread. Lady Eleanor's hand tightened on her daughter's shoulder, but Beatrice shook it off, rising to her feet. "It's true," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a confession. I saw something that night, before Father died. I didn't tell anyone, because I was afraid." Her eyes darted to the others, then back to Miss Marple. "I saw Mrs. Winthrop in the hall, near the library, just before 7. She was holding something, a small bottle, like the one the inspector found. I thought it was perfume, but now—" Her voice broke, and she sank back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Winthrop let out a sharp laugh, though it sounded forced. "Preposterous! The girl's distraught, inventing stories. I was in the parlour all evening writing. Ask anyone." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, her mind racing. "And yet, Mrs. Winthrop, Miss Poole mentioned seeing you leave the parlour briefly around 6:30. You said you were fetching a pen, I believe." Mrs. Winthrop's face paled, her fan snapping shut. Yes, I did step out, but only for a moment. I had no bottle, no poison. This is slander." Miss Marple raised a hand, her tone soothing but firm. "No one is slandering anyone, Mrs. Winthrop. But the truth, like a book, must be read carefully, page by page. Beatrice, thank you for your courage. It has illuminated much." The room erupted in murmurs, accusations flying anew. Dr. Gray stammered a defence of Mrs. Winthrop, while Mr. Hammond's silence grew heavier, his eyes fixed on the floor. Miss Poole's knitting needles clicked faster, as if keeping time with the rise in tension. Miss Marple turned to Japp, her voice low. "Inspector, I suggest you verify Mrs. Winthrop's movements, and perhaps examine the parlour. There may be more to her writing than meets the eye." As Japp bustled off, Miss Marple's thoughts turned inward. Beatrice's revelation had shifted the puzzle, exposing a new layer of deception. The bottle, the page, the quill cufflink, they were all pieces, but the motive was still elusive. Was it greed for the manuscript, revenge for a slight, or something deeper, rooted in the tangled emotions of Willowford Hall? She glanced at Miss Poole, who met her gaze with a knowing nod. The truth was close, Miss Marple felt, but it would require one final push, a trap to coax the killer into the open. The little grey cells hummed with anticipation, ready to turn the page. Chapter 9. The trap is set. The fourth day at Willowford Hall dawned with a fragile calm, the morning sun filtering through the heavy curtains to cast a pale glow over the drawing-room. The guests, worn thin by days of suspicion and confinement, sat in a tense tableau, their faces etched with exhaustion and unease. Miss Jane Marple, however, was a picture of serene determination, her knitting needles moving rhythmically as she sat by the window, her sharp eyes scanning the room like a hawk surveying its prey. The revelations of the previous evening, Beatrice's accusation against Mrs. Winthrop and the mounting evidence against Mr. Baxter, had stirred the pot, and Miss Marple sensed the moment was ripe to lay a trap. Inspector Japp, his confidence bolstered by the discovery of the singed page in Baxter's room and Beatrice's testimony, was convinced the case was nearing its end. "It's coming together, Miss Marple," he said, pacing the room with his notebook in hand. "Baxter's got the motive, money troubles and a grudge against Sir Reginald, and Mrs. Winthrop's not in the clear either. With that bottle Beatrice saw, we'll crack this yet." Miss Marple's smile was polite but guarded. "You are diligent, Inspector, but I caution you. The truth is like a rare book, easily misread if one skips to the final chapter. We must proceed with care." She set her knitting aside, rising to address the room. "My friends, I believe we are close to unravelling this tragedy. But to do so, I require your cooperation. Tonight, we shall gather in the library, where Sir Reginald met his end. There, I hope to shed light on the shadows that surround us." The guests exchanged wary glances, their unease palpable. Lady Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap, her face pale but composed. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice strained, "is this necessary? To return to that place?" "It is essential," Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle but firm. "The library holds the answers, and I believe Sir Reginald's spirit, if I may be so bold, demands that we face them." Beatrice's eyes welled with tears, but she nodded. Mr. Hammond, silent as ever, twisted his silver ring, his gaze fixed on the floor. Dr. Gray adjusted his spectacles nervously, while Mrs. Winthrop's fan snapped open with a sharp click. "A theatrical stunt," she muttered, though her voice lacked its usual bite. Miss Lavinia Poole, knitting quietly, met Miss Marple's eyes with a faint nod, as if sensing the plan unfolding. That evening, as the clock struck 8, the guests assembled in the library, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of candelabras. The chalk outline of Sir Reginald's body had been removed, but the memory of his death hung heavy in the air. The sherry decanter still sat on the sideboard, its amber contents gleaming, and the singed page, now returned to the evidence table, seemed to pulse with unspoken secrets. Miss Marple stood at the centre of the room, her small figure commanding the space with quiet authority. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice clear and steady. "Tonight we shall recreate the moments before Sir Reginald's death. I have asked Inspector Japp to ensure that the library doors are locked, as they were that fateful evening. No one shall enter or leave until we have the truth." Japp, stationed by the doors, gave a curt nod, his hand resting on the key in his pocket. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to the locked doors, the shelves, the decanter. Miss Marple continued, her tone measured but piercing. "Let us consider the facts. Sir Reginald was poisoned with cyanide, administered through his sherry glass. The library was locked, yet the doors were found ajar, with scratches suggesting a forced entry. The manuscript is missing, and a singed page was found, first with Sir Reginald, then another in Mr. Baxter's room. And there is the matter of the quill motif, the paperweight, the cufflink, the brooch. These are not coincidences, my friends. They are clues, carefully placed, perhaps to mislead, or perhaps to reveal." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room. "I propose a simple test. Each of you will recount your movements between 6 and 7 o'clock that evening, the hour before the scream was heard. But first, I wish to examine the decanter once more." She approached the sideboard, her gloved hands lifting the crystal stopper. She sniffed it delicately, her brow furrowing. "Curious," she murmured. "The sherry smells untainted, yet the glass was poisoned. How then was the poison delivered?" Mrs. Winthrop scoffed. "You're wasting our time, Miss Marple. The poison was in the glass, obviously. Baxter put it there, or perhaps Hammond, with his sneaky ways." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Or perhaps neither. Let us consider another possibility. The poison was not in the sherry at all." A gasp rippled through the room, and Miss Marple raised a hand to silence it. Suppose, for a moment, that the cyanide was applied to the glass itself, coated on its rim, perhaps, to be activated when Sir Reginald drank. Such a method would require precision, intimacy with his habits. Only someone close to him would know he always used that particular glass. Lady Eleanor's face went white, her hands trembling. "What are you implying, Miss Marple?" "I imply nothing," Miss Marple said softly. "I merely observe, and I observe that someone in this room knows more than they have admitted. Let us begin with you, Lady Eleanor. Where were you at 6:30? Lady Eleanor's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. "I was in my room, resting. I told you this." "And yet," Miss Marple said, "Miss Poole saw you in the hall at 6:40, near the library. You said you were fetching a shawl, but your headache, it seems, was not so severe as you claimed." The room, tensed, every eye on Lady Eleanor. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. Beatrice let out a small cry, her hand reaching for her mother's. Miss Marple's trap was closing, and the truth, she knew, was about to break free. Chapter 10. The reveal, the library of Willowford Hall, bathed in the flickering glow of candelabras, seemed to pulse with anticipation, as Miss Jane Marple stood at its centre, her small figure radiating quiet authority. The locked doors, the watchful eyes of Inspector Japp, and the tense faces of the guests created an atmosphere as taut as a drawn bowstring. The trap Miss Marple had set was about to spring, and the truth, so carefully hidden, was ready to be unveiled. Miss Marple's gaze swept the room, lingering on each guest. Lady Eleanor, her composure cracking, Beatrice trembling with emotion, Mr. Lionel Baxter, his bravado replaced by unease, Mrs. Clara Winthrop, her fan still, Dr. Percival Gray, nervously adjusting his spectacles, Mr. Victor Hammond, silent and watchful, and Miss Lavinia Poole, whose knitting needles had paused, her eyes sharp with understanding. "My friends," Miss Marple began, her voice clear and steady, "we have gathered here to uncover the truth behind Sir Reginald Ashbourne's death. A man was poisoned, a manuscript stolen, a room locked yet breached. The clues, the singed page, The quill cufflink, the smudged decanter, the inward scratches have led us through a maze of deception. But now the path is clear. She stepped toward the sideboard, her gloved hand hovering over the sherry decanter. Let us begin with the poison. Cyanide, swift and deadly, was found in Sir Reginald's glass. But the decanter, as I noted, is untainted. How then was the poison delivered? Not in the sherry, but on the glass itself, coated on its rim, where a single sip would suffice. This required intimate knowledge of Sir Reginald's habits, for he used only one glass, kept in the library for his evening sherry. Inspector Japp, stationed by the doors, frowned. But who could have done that, Miss Marple? The library was locked, and only Sir Reginald and Lady Eleanor had keys. Precisely, Miss Marple said, her eyes gleaming. The locked doors are central to this mystery. The scratches, Inspector, point inward, not outward. The lock was not forced from the outside, but tampered with from within. Someone wished us to believe an intruder entered, but the truth is simpler. Sir Reginald was alone when he died, or so it appeared. A murmur rippled through the room, cut short by Miss Marple's raised hand. Let us consider the manuscript. Its absence suggests theft, yet the singed pages, one found with Sir Reginald, another in Mr. Baxter's room, tell a different story. Why burn a priceless manuscript? Unless, of course, the burning was a ruse, meant to distract us from the manuscript's true fate. She turned to the evidence table, lifting the singed page in its bag. This page is not from the manuscript. It is vellum, yes, but its script is modern, a clever forgery. The real manuscript, I suspect, is still in this house, hidden by someone who wished to obscure their motive. Mrs. Winthrop's fan snapped shut. This is absurd. Are you saying the manuscript wasn't stolen? I'm saying, Miss Marple replied, that the theft was a facade, like the forced lock. And now, let us turn to the quill motif, the paperweight, the cufflink, the brooch. These are not mere trinkets, but symbols of trust, of intimacy. Sir Reginald gifted such items to those closest to him. Which brings me to the heart of this tragedy. Her gaze settled on Lady Eleanor, whose face had gone ashen. Lady Eleanor, you told us you were in your room, resting, yet Miss Poole saw you near the library at 6:40. You claimed a headache, yet you moved with purpose. And your key, the only other key to this room, was it truly in your room all evening? Lady Eleanor's hands trembled, her voice barely audible. I told you, I was resting. I had no reason to harm Reginald. Miss Marple's tone softened, but her eyes were unyielding. No reason, perhaps, but a burden. Sir Reginald was a man of strong opinions, was he not? About his daughter's future, about his collection, about his legacy. And you, Lady Eleanor, carried the weight of his expectations. I believe you entered this library that evening, using your key. You coated the glass with cyanide, knowing his habit of drinking sherry before dinner. You tampered with the lock to suggest an intruder, and you hid the manuscript, not for profit, but to protect something far more precious. Beatrice let out a cry, her hands covering her mouth. Mother, no, it can't be true! Lady Eleanor's composure shattered, her face crumpling as tears streamed down her cheeks. I had to, she whispered, her voice breaking. Reginald was going to ruin Beatrice's life. He refused to let her marry Lionel, said he was unworthy, that he'd disinherit her. And the manuscript, he was obsessed, planning to sell it to fund his precious library, leaving us with nothing. I couldn't let him destroy her future. The room was silent, the weight of her confession settling like dust. Miss Marple continued, her voice gentle but relentless. You burned a forged page to make us believe the manuscript was destroyed, and you planted another in Mr. Baxter's room to cast suspicion on him. The vial in the garden, the muddy shoes, these were distractions carefully placed to mislead. But the quill paperweight left on the table was your mistake. It was a gift from Sir Reginald, a symbol of your bond, and you couldn't bear to remove it. Lady Eleanor sobbed, her hands covering her face. I only wanted to protect Beatrice. I never wanted him to die. Inspector Japp stepped forward, his face a mix of shock and grudging respect. Well, Miss Marple, you've done it again. I'll take it from here. Miss Marple nodded, her expression sombre. The human heart, Inspector, is the most complex puzzle of all. Lady Eleanor acted out of love, but love, like greed, can lead to tragedy. As Japp led Lady Eleanor away, Beatrice collapsed into a chair, sobbing. The other guests sat in stunned silence, their faces reflecting the shock of the truth unveiled. Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her work in the library complete, but her heart heavy with the cost of justice. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The morning after Lady Eleanor's confession, Willowford Hall seemed to exhale, its oppressive atmosphere lightened by the resolution of the mystery, yet tinged with a lingering sadness. The sun breaking through the clouds cast a soft glow over the gardens, but inside the mood was one of quiet reckoning. The guests, no longer confined, moved about with subdued steps, their voices hushed as they grappled with the truth of Sir Reginald's murder. Miss Jane Marple, her task complete, sat in the drawing-room, her knitting needles clicking softly, her serene demeanour a stark contrast to the emotional tumult around her. Inspector Japp, his notebook now filled with the details of Lady Eleanor's arrest, joined Miss Marple for a final conversation before departing. "You've outdone yourself, Miss Marple," he said, his moustache twitching with reluctant admiration. "I was dead set on Baxter, or even Hammond, but you saw through it all. Those little details, the quill, the scratches. How do you do it?" Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes distant as she gazed out the window. "It is not so much a matter of doing, Inspector, but of seeing. People are like books, you know, full of chapters they wish to keep hidden. My task is merely to read between the lines, to notice the small things, the gesture, the glance, the contradiction that reveal the heart's truth." Japp shook his head, marvelling. "Well, you read this one like a novel. Lady Eleanor, of all people. I'd never have thought a woman like her could—" He trailed off, his expression sobering. Poor Beatrice, losing her father, and now her mother to prison. Miss Marple's needles paused, her face softening with sympathy. "Yes, poor child. Love can be a powerful motive, Inspector, but it is a double-edged sword. Lady Eleanor believed she was protecting Beatrice, but in her desperation, she destroyed the very family she sought to preserve. It is a tragedy, as all murders are, for they leave wounds that never fully heal." She glanced toward the door, where Beatrice stood speaking quietly with Miss Lavinia Poole. The young woman's face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, but there was a strength in her posture, a resolve that had not been there before. Miss Poole, ever observant, patted Beatrice's hand, her own expression one of quiet compassion. "Miss Poole has been a great comfort to her," Miss Marple noted. "There is a wisdom in those who watch and listen, Inspector. She saw much, though she spoke little. I suspect she will guide Beatrice through this darkness. Japp nodded, then hesitated, his brow furrowing. One thing still puzzles me, Miss Marple. The manuscript, where is it? Lady Eleanor hid it, you said, but we've searched the house top to bottom. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with a hint of mischief. The manuscript, Inspector, is safe. Lady Eleanor, in her cleverness, hid it where no one would think to look. Inside the cover of another book, one so ordinary it would be overlooked. I suggest you examine the library's copy of The Complete Angler. Its spine is thicker than it ought to be. Japp's jaw dropped and he scribbled a note, muttering, "You're a marvel, Miss Marple, a marvel." As Japp bustled off to organize the search, Miss Marple rose, gathering her knitting and her valise. She paused at the door to bid farewell to the remaining guests. Dr. Percival Gray, his nervousness subdued, offered a stammering thank you. Mrs. Clara Winthrop, her sharp tongue silenced by the revelation, merely nodded, her fan still. Mr. Victor Hammond, his obsession with rare books now tempered by the tragedy, murmured a quiet farewell. Mr. Lionel Baxter, released from suspicion but shaken, avoided her gaze, his cufflink gleaming faintly in the morning light. Beatrice approached last, her voice trembling but steady. "Miss Marple, I don't know how to thank you. You found the truth, even if it hurts. I just wish—" Her voice broke, and she looked away. Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on her arm. "My dear, the truth is a bitter medicine, but it is necessary. Your father loved you, and your mother in her way did too. Hold to that, and you will find your strength." With a final nod to Miss Poole, whose knowing smile mirrored her own, Miss Marple stepped out into the crisp morning air. The Daimler waited to carry her back to St. Mary Mead, but as she settled into the car, her mind lingered on Willowford Hall. The mystery was solved, the killer unmasked, but the human heart, she knew, would always hold its secrets, some to be solved, others to be cherished. As the car rolled down the gravel drive, Miss Marple opened her knitting bag, her fingers brushing against a small notebook where she jotted her observations. "The little grey cells," she murmured to herself, "they never rest." And with that, she turned her gaze to the horizon, ready for the next puzzle life might bring. Chapter 12. The Hidden Manuscript. The departure of Miss Jane Marple from Willowford Hall left a void, as if the house itself mourned the absence of her quiet wisdom. The guests, though free to leave, lingered, bound by a shared sense of unease, and the aftershock of Lady Eleanor's confession. The library, now unsealed, stood open, its shelves a silent witness to the tragedy that had unfolded within. Inspector Japp, energized by Miss Marple's final clue, had rallied his constables to search for the missing manuscript, convinced that its recovery would tie up the case's loose ends. Beatrice, still reeling from her mother's betrayal, wandered into the library, her steps hesitant. The room felt different now, its grandeur tainted by the memory of her father's death. She paused by the sideboard, her fingers brushing the spot where the sherry decanter had stood, her eyes tracing the outline where her father's body had lain. Miss Lavinia Poole, ever watchful, followed her, her knitting bag slung over her arm, her presence a quiet comfort. "Miss Ashbourne," Miss Poole said softly, her voice carrying the warmth of a trusted confidant. "You mustn't linger here alone. This room holds too many ghosts." Beatrice turned, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I can't help it, Miss Poole. I keep thinking, if I'd spoken to Father that evening, if I'd stopped him from going to the library, maybe—" Her voice broke, and she looked away. Miss Poole placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You mustn't blame yourself, my dear. The heart makes choices we cannot always foresee. Your father loved you, and Miss Marple has given you the truth, painful though it is." At that moment, Inspector Japp burst into the library, his face alight with triumph. In his hands he held a worn copy of the Complete Angler, its spine indeed thicker than its modest appearance suggested. "Miss Marple was right," he exclaimed, carefully opening the book to reveal a hidden compartment within the cover. Nestled inside was a sheaf of vellum pages, their edges adorned with delicate illuminations, the missing manuscript perfectly preserved. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "It was here all along? Mother, she hid it in Father's favourite book." Japp nodded, his moustache twitching with satisfaction. "Clever, I'll give her that. Miss Marple said to check this book, and there it was, tucked away like a secret in plain sight. Your mother must have known no one would look twice at an old fishing book." Miss Poole's lips curved into a faint smile, her eyes gleaming with quiet approval. Miss Marple does have a way of seeing what others miss. The manuscript was never meant to be stolen, only hidden, to protect it perhaps, or to obscure the motive. Japp turned the pages carefully, marvelling at their intricate designs. "Worth a fortune this is. No wonder Lady Eleanor went to such lengths. But why not just take it and run?" Beatrice's voice was soft but firm. "Because it wasn't about money, Inspector. Mother wanted to protect me, to keep Father from selling it, she thought. She thought it would secure our future." The weight of her words settled over the room, and Japp, for once, had no ready response. He cleared his throat, tucking the manuscript under his arm. "Well, it's evidence now. We'll keep it safe until the trial. Monsieur Ashbourne, you'll need to decide what to do with it after." Beatrice nodded, her expression resolute. "I'll keep it for Father's sake. It was his pride, his legacy. I won't let it be sold." Miss Poole's knitting needles resumed their rhythm, a soft counterpoint to the silence. "A wise choice, my dear. Your father would be proud." As Japp left to secure the manuscript, Beatrice lingered, her gaze drifting to the shelves. "Miss Poole," she said quietly, "do you think Miss Marple knew where the manuscript was all along?" Miss Poole's smile was enigmatic. "I suspect she knew more than she let on, Miss Ashbourne. Miss Marple has a gift for seeing the human heart, and the heart you see is where all secrets are kept." Outside the sun climbed higher, its light filtering through the library's windows to illuminate the dust motes dancing in the air. The manuscript, now recovered, was a tangible link to Sir Reginald's passion. But it was Miss Marple's insight that had brought clarity to the chaos. For Beatrice, the path forward was uncertain, but the truth, however painful, had given her a foundation to rebuild. As the day wore on, the guests began to depart, their farewells subdued. Mr. Lionel Baxter, cleared of suspicion but chastened, left without meeting Beatrice's eyes. Mrs. Clara Winthrop, her sharp tongue quieted, boarded a car to London, her fan tucked away. Dr. Percival Gray and Mr. Victor Hammond followed, their scholarly pursuits overshadowed by the tragedy. Only Miss Poole remained, promising to stay with Beatrice until the house felt less like a mausoleum. In the quiet of the library, Beatrice picked up the quill paperweight, its brass surface cool against her palm. It was a small thing, but it carried the weight of her father's love. And her mother's sacrifice. She clutched it tightly, a silent vow to carry on, as the echoes of Miss Marple's wisdom lingered in the air. Chapter 13. Shadows of Motive. The recovery of the manuscript had brought a measure of closure to Willowford Hall, yet the house remained cloaked in an air of quiet melancholy. The guests had nearly all departed, leaving Beatrice Ashbourne and Miss Lavinia Poole as the last remnants of the ill-fated literary retreat. The library, now free of police tape and chalk outlines, felt less like a crime scene and more like a shrine to Sir Reginald's memory, its shelves standing sentinel over his legacy. Beatrice, still grappling with her mother's confession and her father's death, moved through the days in a haze, her grief tempered by a growing resolve to honour her family's name. Miss Poole, ever the steadfast companion, had taken to sitting with Beatrice in the drawing-room, her knitting a constant presence as they spoke of the future. The manuscript, now secured in a locked case under Inspector Japp's orders, awaited its fate, but its discovery had raised new questions. Questions that lingered in Beatrice's mind and, unbeknownst to her, in the mind of another. On the afternoon of the 5th day, a letter arrived at Willowford Hall, addressed to Beatrice in a neat, unfamiliar hand. It was delivered by the postman, who remarked that it had been posted locally, a detail that piqued Miss Poole's interest as she watched Beatrice open it. The letter was brief, written on plain paper, but its contents sent a chill through the room. Miss Ashbourne, the truth is not yet fully told. Your mother's confession protects another. Seek the quill's shadow, and you will find the hand that struck. A friend, Beatrice's hands trembled as she read the words aloud, her voice faltering. Miss Poole, what does this mean? Mother confessed. She admitted everything. Could there be more? Miss Poole's knitting needles paused, her sharp eyes narrowing as she took the letter from Beatrice. This is most curious, she said, her tone calm but laced with intrigue. The quill's shadow, a cryptic phrase but not without meaning. It suggests someone believes Lady Eleanor's confession is incomplete, that another hand was involved. Beatrice's face paled. But who? And why write to me now, after Miss Marple solved the case? Miss Poole's lips curved into a faint smile, reminiscent of Miss Marple's own knowing expression. Miss Marple unravelled the murder, my dear, but human motives are like old books. Some pages stick together, hiding secrets even from the keenest reader. This letter suggests a shadow motive, something deeper than greed or love. Determined to uncover the truth, Beatrice and Miss Poole resolved to investigate the letter's cryptic clue. They began in the library, where the quill paperweight still sat on the oak table, its brass surface catching the afternoon light. Beatrice picked it up, turning it over in her hands. The quill's shadow, she murmured. Father loved this paperweight. He said it reminded him of his work, his passion for words. Miss Poole's eyes gleamed. Let us consider the shadow, then. A shadow is cast by light, is it not? Perhaps we should look where the light falls. They moved to the window, where the sun streamed through, casting long shadows across the room. Beatrice held the paperweight up, letting its shadow fall on the bookshelf behind. The quill's silhouette stretched across a row of books, settling on a slim volume tucked between larger tomes. It was an unremarkable book, a collection of poetry, but its spine bore a faint mark, a quill etched in gold, barely visible. Beatrice's breath caught as she pulled the book from the shelf. Inside, tucked between the pages, was a single sheet of paper. Its edges yellowed, but not singed. It was a letter, written in Sir Reginald's precise hand, addressed to his solicitor. My dear Mr. Harrow, I have uncovered evidence of a grave betrayal within my household. Should anything befall me, look to the one who covets my collection most keenly. Manuscript is my safeguard, hidden where only my heart would look. Yours, Reginald Ashbourne. Beatrice's eyes widened, her voice trembling as she read the letter aloud. Father knew. He knew someone was plotting against him. But who? Mother or someone else? Miss Poole's expression grew grave. This letter suggests Sir Reginald suspected treachery, but not necessarily from your mother. The one who covets the collection. That could point to Mr. Hammond with his obsession for rare books, or perhaps Dr. Gray, who rivaled your father in scholarship. Beatrice clutched the letter, her resolve hardening. We must find out, Miss Poole. If Mother took the blame for someone else, I have to know the truth, for her sake and Father's. Miss Poole nodded, her knitting set aside. We shall proceed carefully, my dear. The quill's shadow has led us to this letter, but the hand that struck remains hidden. We must tread lightly, for the truth, once uncovered, may bring more pain. As the afternoon waned, Beatrice and Miss Poole began to retrace the clues, their minds echoing Miss Marple's methodical approach. The letter, the quill, the manuscript, they were pieces of a larger puzzle, one that suggested Lady Eleanor's confession was but the surface of a deeper betrayal. The shadows of Willowford Hall, it seemed, still held secrets waiting to be brought into the light. Chapter 14. The Second Truth. The discovery of Sir Reginald's letter had ignited a spark of determination in Beatrice Ashbourne, her grief now tempered by a fierce need to uncover the full truth. Willowford Hall, though quieter with the departure of most guests, seemed to hum with the weight of its secrets, as if the very walls whispered of betrayal. Miss Lavinia Poole, her knitting set aside, had become Beatrice's steadfast ally, her sharp mind and quiet resolve a mirror to Miss Marple's own. Together they sat in the library, the letter spread before them, its words a haunting echo of Sir Reginald's suspicions. Beatrice's fingers traced the quill mark on the poetry book's spine, her voice steady but laced with urgency. Father wrote of a betrayal, Miss Poole. He suspected someone close to him, someone who coveted his collection. But Mother confessed to the murder. Could she have been protecting someone else, as the anonymous letter suggested? Miss Poole's eyes narrowed, her expression thoughtful. It is possible, my dear. Lady Eleanor's confession was compelling, but Miss Marple herself hinted at the complexity of human motives. This letter points to another hand, one that may have manipulated events to let your mother take the blame. We must consider who stood to gain most from Sir Reginald's death, and from the manuscript's concealment. Beatrice nodded, her mind racing. Mr. Hammond, perhaps. He was obsessed with Father's collection, always asking about the manuscript. Or Dr. Gray. He and Father argued over manuscripts before, but why would Mother protect either of them? Miss Poole picked up the letter, her gaze lingering on Sir Reginald's precise handwriting. Let us return to the clues. The quill motif, paperweight, cufflink, brooch. ties this crime to someone intimate with your father. The letter speaks of the one who covets my collection most keenly. We must also consider the anonymous note, the quill's shadow. Who knew enough to send such a cryptic message, and why now? Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the library door. It was Jenny, the housemaid, her face pale and her apron twisted in her hands. "Miss Beatrice, Miss Poole," she said, her voice trembling. I overheard something last night. I didn't want to say before, with the inspector and all, but it's been weighing on me." Beatrice's heart quickened. "What did you hear, Jenny? You must tell us." Jenny glanced nervously over her shoulder, then stepped closer. "It was Mr. Hammond, ma'am. I heard him talking to someone in the garden, late, the night before Miss Marple left. I couldn't see who, but he was saying something about the manuscript being safe, and no one suspecting. It sounded wrong, like he knew more than he let on." Miss Poole's lips pursed, her eyes gleaming with interest. "Thank you, Jenny. You've done well to tell us. Did you hear anything else? A name, perhaps, or what they planned?" Jenny shook her head, her cheeks flushing. "No, ma'am. I was too scared to stay longer. But Mr. Hammond, he was holding something, a small book or paper, and he looked secretive." Beatrice and Miss Poole exchanged a glance, the pieces of the puzzle shifting once more. "Thank you, Jenny," Beatrice said, dismissing the girl with a reassuring smile. As the housemaid left, Beatrice turned to Miss Poole, her voice firm. "We need to find Mr. Hammond. If he's involved, he may still be in Devon. He left only yesterday." Miss Poole nodded, rising with a purposeful air. "We shall start with his room, my dear. If he was hiding something, there may be traces yet." They made their way to the guest wing, where Mr. Hammond's room stood empty, its furnishings pristine but for a faint scent of ink and old paper. Beatrice searched the desk, finding nothing but a few scribbled notes about rare books, while Miss Poole examined the wardrobe. Her fingers paused on a small leather satchel, tucked behind a stack of linens. Inside was a single item, a photograph of Sir Reginald and Mr. Hammond at an auction, their faces tense, and on the back a scrawled note in Hammond's hand. "The quill binds us, but only one can claim it." Beatrice's breath caught. "The quill again! Miss Poole, this proves it. Hammond was involved. But how? And why would Mother protect him?" Miss Poole's expression grew grave. "The photograph suggests a deeper connection between your father and Mr. Hammond, a rivalry, perhaps, or a shared secret. The note implies the quill motif was more than a decorative choice. We must confront Mr. Hammond, but first, let us consider the anonymous letter. Who else knew of the quill's significance?" Beatrice's eyes widened. "Dr. Gray! He knew Father's collection intimately, and he was so nervous, always adjusting his spectacles. Could he have sent the letter to expose Hammond?" Miss Poole nodded slowly. "It is possible, or perhaps someone else, someone who watched from the shadows, like our anonymous friend." She paused, her gaze distant. "We must act quickly, Beatrice. If Hammond is the true culprit, he may already be covering his tracks." They resolved to contact Inspector Japp, who was still in the village, and to track down Mr. Hammond, whose departure had been abrupt. As they left the room, Beatrice clutched the photograph, her resolve hardening. The quill's shadow had led them to a new truth, one that suggested Lady Eleanor's sacrifice was not the end of the story. The real killer, it seemed, was still at large, and Willowford Hall's secrets were far from fully revealed. Chapter 15. The Final Unveiling. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over Willowford Hall, its golden rays doing little to dispel the chill of unresolved secrets. Beatrice Ashbourne and Miss Lavinia Poole, armed with the photograph and Sir Reginald's letter, stood in the library, their determination a quiet fire against the backdrop of the house's lingering sorrow. The discovery of Mr. Victor Hammond's cryptic note and Jenny's overheard conversation had reignited the mystery, suggesting that Lady Eleanor's confession was but a veil over a deeper truth. With Inspector Japp summoned back to the estate, the stage was set for the final unveiling of Willowford Hall's secrets. Beatrice, clutching the photograph of her father and Hammond, paced the library, her voice steady but urgent. "Miss Poole, if Mother took the blame to protect someone, it must be Hammond. This note, the quill binds us. It's too specific. He knew something, and Father suspected him. But why would Mother shield him?" Miss Poole, her knitting set aside, stood by the bookshelf where the manuscript had been found, her sharp eyes scanning the quill-marked poetry volume. "The quill, my dear, is the key. It was not just a motif, but a symbol of trust and betrayal. Your father's letter spoke of someone who coveted his collection. Hammond, with his obsession for rare books, fits that description, but so too does another. We must consider all possibilities." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of gravel crunching outside. Inspector Japp's car pulled up, followed by another vehicle, a taxi from which Mr. Victor Hammond emerged, his pale face taut with apprehension. Japp had tracked him to a nearby inn, where he had lingered rather than returning to London. The inspector, his moustache bristling with renewed purpose, escorted Hammond into the library, where Beatrice and Miss Poole awaited. "Mr. Hammond," Japp said, his tone gruff, "you've some explaining to do. We've got new evidence, a letter, a photograph, and a witness who heard you talking about the manuscript. Care to tell us what you were hiding?" Hammond's eyes darted to Beatrice, then to the photograph in her hand. His fingers twisted his silver ring, the quill motif catching the light. I don't know what you mean," he stammered. "I told Miss Marple everything. I was in my room that evening, reading. Miss Poole stepped forward, her voice calm but piercing. And yet Jenny overheard you in the garden, speaking of the manuscript being safe and no one suspecting. And this note," she gestured to the photograph's back, "suggests a deeper connection to Sir Reginald. The quill binds you, does it not?" Hammond's composure cracked, his shoulders slumping. "It wasn't what you think," he said, his voice low. "Reginald and I, we were partners, years ago, in a venture to acquire rare manuscripts. The quill was our symbol, a private jest, but he betrayed me, outbid me at an auction, took a manuscript I'd spent years tracking. I came here to confront him, to demand a share of this new find, but I didn't kill him." Beatrice's eyes blazed. "Then why hide the photograph? Why the secrecy?" Hammond hesitated, his gaze dropping. "Because I suspected someone else. I saw Dr. Gray near the library that evening, before the scream. He was holding a small vial, like the one found in the garden. I thought he might have done it, but I had no proof." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling like dust. Beatrice turned to Miss Poole, her voice trembling. "Dr. Gray, could he have? But why would Mother protect him?" Miss Poole's eyes gleamed, her mind racing. Dr. Gray, with his scholarly rivalry, had motive. But there is one final piece we must consider: the anonymous letter. It was sent to you, Beatrice, to point us toward the quill's shadow. Who knew enough to write it? Jap, frowning, interjected. Hold on. Are you saying Gray's the killer and Lady Eleanor covered for him? That makes no sense. Miss Poole's smile was faint but knowing. Unless, Inspector, the letter was written by someone who wanted the truth to emerge without implicating themselves. Someone who watched, who saw everything. She turned to Beatrice. My dear, I believe I sent that letter. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You, Miss Poole? But why? Miss Poole's expression softened. Because I saw the pain in your eyes, and I knew Miss Marple's solution, while brilliant, was incomplete. I watched Dr. Gray that evening, saw him linger near the library, his hands trembling. I saw Lady Eleanor's desperation to protect you, even at the cost of her own freedom. I wrote the letter to nudge you, toward the truth, to ensure justice was fully served. Jap's jaw dropped. You're saying Gray poisoned the glass, and Lady Eleanor took the fall? Miss Poole nodded. Dr. Gray coveted the manuscript, but more than that, he resented Sir Reginald's dominance in their field. He coated the glass with cyanide, knowing Sir Reginald's habits. Lady Eleanor, discovering his act, hid the manuscript and confessed to protect Beatrice from the scandal of a family friend's betrayal. She believed Gray's exposure would destroy you, Beatrice, and she could not bear that. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. Mother, she sacrificed everything for me. Jap, recovering, turned to Hammond. And you, keeping quiet about Gray, why? Hammond sighed. I was afraid. If I accused him without proof, I'd be next. I thought Miss Marple would see it. Miss Poole placed a hand on Beatrice's arm. She did, in her way, but it was for us to finish her work. Jap, his notebook already open, barked orders to his constables to locate Dr. Gray, who had returned to Oxford. As Hammond was detained for further questioning, Beatrice sank into a chair. The photograph and letter clutched to her chest. It's over, she whispered. The truth is out. Miss Poole resumed her knitting, her needles clicking softly. The truth, my dear, is never truly over. It lives in the heart, shaping those who carry it. You are stronger for it, and your father's legacy will endure. As the sun set over Willowford Hall, the library stood quiet, its secrets finally laid bare. The quill's shadow had led to the final truth, and Beatrice, though scarred, stood ready to face the future, guided by the wisdom of those who had seen her through the darkness.